What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the PT Coffee Cast, brought to you by The Movement. My name is Dalton, and alongside me today is my beautifully bearded friend, William. William, how are we doing today?
Doing good, man. I really like what you've got going on here. I'll say, first of all, it's a beautiful haircut.
Thank you.
That's why I'm wearing my beanie, because, I got to cover this mop.
Dude, I know we've talked about this many times on the podcast, but I don't think there's many things better than a nice fresh cut.
It's true. But that's not the only thing you have going on.
Oh, God.
The other thing is this beautiful mug here.
I know. Shout out to the dog mug. There's a wiener dog on there, which I now have a wiener dog.
All kinds of dog types. Let's see, a mini schnauzer on there.
Yeah.
Pretty sure there's a Weimaraner.
This is a, what is the word? Homage to Jenna?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
That's the right word.
It might
right?
be her mug.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You guys probably heard her on this podcast before.
And then you've got whatever's going on these socks, which I feel like there's a little bit to uncover there.
These are new socks. These are like death by caffeine.
Ooh.
Yeah. Socks.
Very appropriate.
I feel like if there's any way that I want to go out,
just have a cup of coffee and then just
by caffeine overload. This is one of the new pairs of socks I got. So stay tuned over the course of the rest of this year and into 2024.
This is very exciting.
Yeah.
All right.
But let's dive into the episode, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you aren't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do that on your podcast platform. If you aren't on our YouTube channel and subscribed yet, head over there so you can see all the beautiful visual things we got going on. The mug, my haircut, Will's beard, the socks. Make sure you subscribe there so you can see all the video episodes. And then also make sure you head over and check out our website. themovementorship.com has all things mentorship, all things podcast over there. And I think that's about it. So why don't we dive into today's episode? We're going to talk about how you can utilize your charting for things other than objective measurements or testing. This kind of came up in our weekly meeting at the movement that we have with our team. And Will had brought it up from a particular situation he had with a client that he was working with that I thought was like a great story. And I think we can kind of elaborate on how we can use our charts for other things other than just like the objective measures that we're getting in a session.
We're doing the most exciting series ever. Everybody's favorite thing.
Charting. Yeah. This is the charting series.
But no, I mean, just getting into it a little bit. Basically, I had a client book in with me. He booked in late and for early in the morning. And I noticed that it was another clinician's past client. And there just wasn't much time to be able to have a conversation with the clinician about the client that booked in. And so I just did a little bit of like chart review just to see what was going on with the client before and see if I could learn anything about them before they came in. And I noticed that there was some stuff just kind of highlighting some, I won't get into like the specifics, but just like, barriers that came up throughout the process. And it helped me just kind of know ahead of time what some of those things were that they might come up, and I might be able to reinforce some of the talking points that were going on before with the other clinician.
Yeah, and I think that is an example of where charting things outside of just the objective measures are super helpful, especially when you're seeing this client that someone else saw, like to know some of those honestly mindset barriers or just struggles that they had outside of their actual injury is super valuable, both with like connecting with the client but also understanding some of the challenges or things you're going to have to navigate with them, which oftentimes the biggest barriers we see are those mindset shifts or those behavior changes or some of those things that they struggle with outside of their actual injury.
Yeah, even just things like, lifestyle adjustments that you've talked about that have been sort of light bulb moments that have helped you be more consistent with the exercises, or figure out a way to just like dial things in that's not necessarily like a specific exercise, or like how much pain they have that day, or objective findings, because those things often are they're what we pay attention to, and I think we take a lot of pride in like trying to look at the whole person, their lifestyle, their beliefs, the things that they've identified with us that are barriers to them reaching their goals, and so, but then I think you get in the caught in the trap of like doing that, but then not actually writing those things down, and then maybe you remember them the next time, but maybe you don't.
Totally.
Right? Where instead, like if you just make a note of some of those things and treat it like just as valuable as how much range of motion someone has, then you guarantee you can come back to that the next time. I think that's really important, because we know, like, even for, and this is not at all like us being judgmental of other people, but like even when you think about yourself and your own habits and stuff, you need to be reminded, like, it's so they're habits for a reason, right? Because you've been doing them for so long, even if it's negatively impacting something, right? And you're trying to change that. It's like just going, oh, I'm going to change this, and just having that conversation once and then forgetting about it is probably unlikely to actually produce the change. So like, it's kind of our job to have that be something that gets brought up, and not just hoping you bring it up.
Yeah, and I think the thing that actually really, hit me and is going to be something that I'm going to implement more now from that conversation is like just charting or tracking, or however you want to do it, those conversations and the common things that come up actually will make it easier for you to communicate to the client if that barrier continues to be a barrier that's impacting their outcomes. And how I would foresee it is, if someone's continually having a hard time building the habit of implementing exercise into their daily life, and we've all had those clients that have done things for a period of time, done really well, saw a good result, and then they kind of yo-yo through the cycle that we all kind of go through sometimes, is then you get off track, things get a little bit worse, and you get back on track, and then you keep yo-yoing back and forth. If you're able to document those conversations or those points, and track that for them, it can be one of those things where eventually you can sit down and be like, hey, now that we've been working with each other for X amount of time, there's some things that I'm noticing. Like, would you be interested in hearing some of my thoughts on that? And then you can share with them and show them that you've been documenting over time, like, hey, here's what we're seeing is when these are the times in which you reported to me that you were having trouble, and those were correlated with you not continuing to be consistent with your exercise. What else is also correlated with that is like other stressors in your life have increased, and then you can sit down and show that to them, and that is a lot more impactful for them to make a change versus you just telling them, even if you do remember, because a lot of times like I'll remember the struggles that my clients are having, but you need like some type of visual support, or I guess you could call it like objective information to show to the client to then help open up that conversation, or have them see like, oh yeah, every 3 months, like this is happening. And then that might be an entry point into how you can figure out, okay, how do we work through these points in time together and solve this kind of problem, or implement strategies to mitigate this.
Or even just like, hey, what do you think about that? Like having them just
be aware, think about it. Yeah, for sure.
No, for sure. And I think, we all know that kind of like stages of change, like the pre-contemplative, like that kind of, that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think about it like, we know behavior change is hard, right? And so sometimes I think about it as like, if it's a circle, and you're going through those changes and you take one step forward, I almost see it as like, sometimes it's like that slowly going back a little bit until something happens again.
Mm-hmm.
And so like your goal is to like keep them moving forward, you know? And like a good example of that is I have a lot of clients who are like, you know, we're getting stronger, we're doing exercises, and they're like, hey, I wonder if I should maybe get some more weights. And I'm like, yes, you should. And I write that down in my notes that they brought that up. Then the next time, I'm like, hey, you mentioned you were thinking about getting weights. What do you think about that now? Oh, yeah, like I just don't know what to get. Here's some options. Here's where you can go get it. Because now they're in more of the like contemplative stage, right? Where they're actually thinking about going and getting it. So I'm helping them take that next step, right? And it's like, if you didn't write that down, you might just forget about the fact that they didn't get weights. They wanted to get weights, and then that opportunity's kind of lost. They're like back into pre-contemplative. Does that make sense?
Totally, yeah, it makes sense, ton of sense. And I even if even if you're like verbalizing to them, oh, I'm gonna write this down, I'm gonna note this. Like that's another big thing that will help them maybe move that forward. And so I think it's a great way to keep track of and or initiate those behavior changes or those struggles that we know most clients have that are usually, again, I said this at the start, but usually the driver of why they don't maybe accomplish the goals or improve their situation the way that they want to. Oftentimes, it's not the injury itself being the thing that keeps them from getting them to where they want to go. It's all those things around it most of the time.
And we get it that it's like hard to do this perfectly all the time, you know, but one thing you can try doing is like doing it right when they say it, to like go and pop it right after that conversation, like immediately after, so that doesn't get like pushed to the side. But you know, the main point is like we want to encourage people to think like that more and actually utilize their charts like that more often. You know, think about those other things besides just the objective findings and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything else around that idea that you think is important, or that a way that you use it differently than what we kind of talked about?
I'm trying to think. Like, it's all kind of stuff, you know, like obviously there's that one example I just gave, but there's tons of different things, right? It can be any conversation about, you know, mindset, about habits, about how you're going to try to implement a certain thing. But I'm kind of struggling with figuring out.
Yeah, I think it can be like powerful in a way with like someone says, you know, oh, I'm only able to do this, or you know, I was able. They say something in which then you can write down and then refer to like 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, when they're actually doing that thing like way better. And I think that's a super important one, because a lot of times people just don't realize how much progress that they've made from when they first came in. That like when you're in it and you're moving through it, you don't feel like you're moving through it or making change. But then when you're able to look back on it and reflect on it and maybe have someone like a clinician remind you, then you're like, oh yeah, shit, like I've definitely like made quite a bit of progress with this.
That kind of prompted me to think of a good example. So I had a client where the client had like an ankle issue, and I had sort of alluded to the fact that in the future we're going to do stuff like this. And I did like a lateral hop. And the client was like, whoa. And so I just wrote down that response. You know, like client was very shocked at the idea of doing this. Because like then I can go back, and if we're like in a position where it's seeming like that kind of thing is more possible, I can bring that up again. And obviously there's tons of ways you can kind of use that.
Yeah.
You know, like you just said, like highlighting like how much progress they've made, that they're even in a spot to consider doing that, where they couldn't even imagine it at the start. But then also just like, hey, like, you know, how do you feel about doing that now? and seeing if it's different. Like, that's real change. It's not a tissue change, but it's probably reflective of like confidence and probably a proxy measure of how good their injury's going.
Yeah, for sure. And I think and I'm saying we as in me, and us, and I'm sure our whole team, I think we could do, and probably everyone listening, is that we could do a better job of highlighting, documenting, and having clients see that transformation. Because when it comes down to, getting people committed, or let's say selling people on the solution that you have to their problem and all of this stuff, you're not selling I'm going to fix your knee. Like, you're selling a transformation that client's going to have. That transformation of that reaction of, whoa, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do that, to, hell yeah, I just crushed that. Like, that's what you're selling. That's what you're doing as a clinician. And making people realize that is what you're doing is super important. And when people are injured, in a dark place, not happy, frustrated, pissed off, all that stuff, they don't see that transformation at all. They don't think that that's possible. And part of like our job is to show them that that's possible, but also have pieces like what you're just talking about to keep them motivated and progressing forward and realizing that they are in the midst of that transformation.
I think like what we're trying to promote is like, obviously you have to document because it's, for the college and because you have to, but think about it as a tool also, and like, how can you use your documentation to improve your ability to impact clients, right? So not just getting it done because you have to. Like, think about, how can I actually leverage this to make my clients better?
Yeah, for sure. Sweet. I think that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. If you aren't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe on your podcast platforms. If you aren't subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure you head over there and subscribe so you can see our beautiful faces, our beautiful socks, our beautiful haircuts. If you aren't following us on Instagram, head over there, follow us at PT CoffeeCast. We'll post clips there of the podcast and some other stuff. And then lastly, make sure you check out themovementmentorship.com about all things mentorship, all things podcast. But that's all we got for today, guys. As always, stay caffeinated. Peace.